On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, the Lightning extended Radish and Hagel this week. We'll focus mainly on Hagel signing. What does that mean for the Lightning in the future as they continue to navigate themselves around this salary cap issue? We talk about all that and more, but first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Tanker. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And this episode of Locked On Lightning is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers could get $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On this episode, we're talking about obviously the biggest news that I think has happened in this offseason. Really, Brandon Hagel being extended. And in case you haven't heard, so Hagel signed a new deal with the Lightning, 8 years, $52 million with a $17 million signing bonus, which averages out to 6.5 mil a year AAV. That will go into effect during the 24-25 season. Right now, Hagel is in the last year of his contract that he signed with when he was with his time with the Chicago Blackhawks. He is due to make about probably two and a little bit of change. So let's call it 2 mil this year. And I have to say my initial thoughts, and before we get into that real quick, I just want to say something right off the top of the show, unrelated to hockey. I hope if you are somebody that is listening to this or watching this on YouTube and you were in the Carolinas or in Florida or any of the areas that were affected by this past week's hurricane and really got the worst of it, I hope this finds you well. I hope your family is safe, and I hope that, hopefully, you're just safe and that's it. So, our thoughts here on Locked On Lightning, and I'm sure the Locked On podcast go out to all those that were affected by this past week's hurricane. So just wanted to throw that out there. If you are a listener of the show, you can find me on Twitter, Danky Dank, DENKYD8NK. If you want to reach out and you're in one of those areas that was affected by the hurricane, just want to talk about it. Let me know you're safe or whatever. I'm here. I'm all ears. So getting back to Hagel. Obviously, a very good signing for the Tampa Bay Lightning and a very well-deserved signing for Hagel to get some more money. First time this guy is going to make some really big-time money in his career, and well-deserved coming off a 30-goal, 64-point season for Tampa Bay Lightning, which I firmly believe is really what we signed up for, what Julien Brisebois had in mind when he traded for Brandon Hagel last season from the Chicago Blackhawks. And what I will say is that I think if I have to give a grade on this for Brandon Hagel in terms of, the potential versus the money, because like I said, this is an 8-year deal. So the Lightning and Hagel's only 25 right now. So that's the added plus there. He doesn't turn 26 until next August. He actually just turned 25. So the Lightning, really the deal, the timing of this, I think is great. I think that if I put a grade on it, I'm giving it a A. I think the only thing that will make it an A+ is if he goes out and has a Braden Point type season, and that, or maybe 50 goals or whatever, 40 goals, 100 points, whatever the case may be. But the Lightning signing him to $50+ million, I think for the duration, I think is really, really a steal, because when you look at what we have discussed all season long, and really what we kind of saw spurts off last season when he came over from Chicago, was that really that he had that ability to kind of be like a like a Braden Point. And I'm not saying that he's going to turn into a 50 goal scorer. I think he's going to be a little bit more of a point getter. And that also depends on, where he's played, as we've spoken about extensively on this show, how I really think that last year it should have started, but definitely going into this season with kind of Steven Stamkos, still somewhat in the prime of his career, but you're starting to see little splinters here and there of kind of that regression or that decline, whatever you want to call it. As well as Hagel, as we have seen him uh, in past games, being able to play on the same line with Point and Kucherov. I think really it is very important that John Cooper, if you want to maximize as to get as much out of Brandon Hagel as possible, you definitely want to put him on the first line with Point and Kucherov, because I think that he complements both their styles very well. I feel like he not only could score, obviously, as what we saw last season, 30 goals. I mean, it's very hard, as maybe as common as you have seen it, especially in today's NHL, with scoring being as high and as frequent as it is. I think really what it comes down to is that, 30 goals isn't an easy thing to do in today's NHL. Everyone's faster, everyone's stronger, everyone's bigger. The goaltending is even a lot better than I think it was maybe 10 years ago. And I think that the Lightning, as do I, think that he's just only going to improve. Now, where his ceiling is going to be, that is still yet to be determined. Like I said, I firmly believe that maybe he is going to be in the 40, maybe even 45 if he has a crazy goal scoring year. But I think if you throw him on the first line with Cooch, with Point, I think we could see 30, 35 goals out of him, close to 100 points a year. And for what you're paying the guy, I think that that is a steal. I think that the Lightning, I think Julian Brisebois have played this phenomenally well in terms of thinking of the long run. Now, if you've been a listener of this show for quite some time, I'm, especially with the Lightning's cap constrictions that they currently have, it will improve as the years go on, and that's why I think that this deal is going to be an absolute steal for the Lightning. But I think that I'm not, as you know, I'm not a fan of these deals initially. The Pauls, the Sorelli deal. I know that those deals kick in right away. The Sergachev deal as well. And we're not exactly sure what Stamkos is going to get after next offseason. I think that's a contract that I'm very stressed for. I don't think it's going to be anything remotely close to 7. I think it's going to be maybe tops 5 AV, but we'll get into that when the time comes. But I think it's a good there's pros and cons with signing these kinds of deals, especially like I said, where the Lightning don't really have a lot of wiggle room, where they're still, in my mind, trying to figure out what pieces fit, what pieces don't. Especially when you look at certain storylines that are revolving around this team right now. I still think that that fourth line, really, it's still shaping up. There's a lot of potential there for it to be very good, but at the same time, what if it doesn't work out? You always have to think about that. What if the Lightning need to go out there and get a couple of pieces, take on more salary, and at the same time, they don't really have a lot of trade chips as well. So there's something about that to think about. They did go out this offseason and get Connor Sherry, which, like I said at the time, and I will continue to say until he hits the ice and proves me otherwise, I thought that was a very good signing. But there's still a lot of, like I said, storylines revolving around this Tampa Bay Lightning team, around this roster, as to how it's currently constructed. And that's why normally I'm not for these long-term deals. Nick Paul deal, I liked it in theory. I thought that he played well in the first year. He showed a lot of what he could do. Going into his second year this past season, thought he played exemplary hockey. Mikhail Sergachev going to be a cornerstone of this um, defensive pack for the next 10, 15 years. Anthony Cirelli, future Selke Trophy winner, I believe. Now that especially Patrice Bergeron is out of the NHL, you're going to start to see a little bit more of what other centers around the league can do, and you're going to see some different names really in the mix every single year. And Cirelli's definitely that guy. When he's healthy, could definitely be one of the best defensive centers in the league. But those deals, like I said, those guys, Cirelli, I'm fine with that. We already know what he could do. We know what he's capable of. Paul, that deal, I wasn't exactly crazy about it, but I mean, all we could do was look forward. We can't really just dwell on it unless, he just starts to decline very rapidly, or we don't continue to see what we have seen from him performance wise going forward. But at the end of the day, and this is really, I think, the theme that we're not really hearing a lot. A lot of it also has to do with the fact that it's the NHL offseason. There's really not a lot going on. So you're not really going to get a lot of press around it. And not right now, but maybe in a couple of years, Brandon Hagel, let's face it, doesn't really move the needle for a lot of people outside of Tampa Bay. But the bottom line with the Brandon Hagel deal and with all these deals, which I think that, there might be some distrust with Julian Brisebois and his methods because of the whole Tanner Jeannot thing from last year. I'm confident that Jeannot's going to really show us this year what kind of player he was supposed to be last season. But I am firmly confident that these deals, as long as the Lightning continue to win, continue to perform well, continue to make deep runs in the playoffs, these deals are going to be steals. And eventually, once these players really turn into, if some of them aren't already, I mean, we spoke about Braden Point, we've spoken about Anthony Cirelli, but the Nick Pauls, the Sergachevs, even the Radishes and the Hagels, those guys are the next, I guess, generation of leaders on this team. Sergachev is already, but as this core, the Hedmans, the Stamkoses, even Cooch, who he's no spring chicken, but he's also not old by human standards or really yet by hockey standards. Those guys are continuing to age. That's why it's important to lock up these guys, especially with the cap going up, hopefully in the next couple of years. I mean, we'll still wait and see. I mean, I feel like this is a year-by-year basis, but I feel like Julian Brisebois signing these deals, his projection is that the league will move up the cap significantly. I think it's only going up by $1 million this year, which it's really not that much, but at the end of the day, I think that this signing, especially this Hagel signing, is going to be very beneficial. Now, it might cause some issues if he turns out to be a superstar, like kind of the same trajectory what we saw with Braden Point. A lot of people don't know about him, and then he has a couple of great years, and now he's exponentially outperforming his contract. Hopefully, we have that issue with Brandon Hagel, but that could be an issue that could bring on restructuring of a contract or whatever, but we'll cross that road when we get there. Let me know in the comment section below this video on YouTube what you think about the signing. Do you like it? Do you think it's maybe a little premature? Quite frankly, I never want to get into an offseason with a player, regardless if they're a UFA or RFA. I never want to get into the offseason where they don't have a contract, especially if it's a player that you absolutely plan on bringing back. So, I'm glad they got this done, and now it doesn't have to loom over the team's head or Brandon Hagel's head, and we could just focus on hockey coming into the season. So we'll continue more on this topic after the break in just a bit. But first, I want to talk about our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, if you haven't heard, FanDuel Sportsbook is America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get 200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday ticket with YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you could bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. And I'm already putting on that easy prop bet or that futures bet on the Lightning will be making the playoffs. Now, as for division winning, maybe depending at the All-Star break, we'll have that conversation. If they're just out of it, maybe I'll throw a bet on that. But definitely for those of you who are new to the betting game, you definitely don't want to miss out on this offer from FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season as well as the upcoming NHL season with an offer you don't want to miss. All right. Like I said before, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. We are available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could find us on our social media page at LO_Lightning on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. You could find me on Twitter, DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. I love hearing from all of you. Let me know your questions. I think I had a listener reach out to me, I believe, earlier in the week about the Hagel signing. And I guess hopefully I answered the question kind of in a broad explanation, and hopefully I continue to maybe clarify it or at least build upon it as we continue to talk about, obviously, Brandon Hagel signing signing an extension really with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I think that, at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't want to jump the gun and say that Brandon Hagel is going to be a replacement for anybody. I would rather say that because who in reality, when we look at the players on this Tampa Bay Lightning team, like I said, the older ones that are kind of, I wouldn't say towards the end of their careers, because I don't think that really is a good way to look at it. But obviously the name that comes up, especially with his contract being up next year, is Steven Stamkos. And I don't think that Stamkos is at the end of his career. But I also don't think he's playing till he's 40. Stamkos is around my age. I think he's like 31, 32. I'm 31 myself. But when I look at Brandon Hagel, and I think this is a good conversation to have when we're talking about him possibly spending a good part of his career here, and especially what he has shown us, and a lot of parallels between him and Braden Point. I think that he could go down as one of the better Tampa Bay Lightning players in the franchise history. And I know that's a lot to say, considering the guy just really kind of had his breakout season, if you want to kind of look at it that way. But it's true, though. When you look at his contract, when you look at the contract and you look at what he has done, and if you've listened to this show really since day one, same things have been said about Braden Point to a certain extent. The guy has gotten better every single year, especially since he's come into the league. Really, 2019, really not much of anything. I mean, he also played one game, so you can't really look at that. But all right, 2020, COVID year, is that really something that you could really take into account? I know a lot of people feel certain types of ways about the COVID year with a lot of players, and whether they've had good seasons or not. Quite frankly, I don't know. I don't know how to view it objectively, because the Lightning were winning cups at that point. They went on to win 2, of course, but the subsequent years after that, you look at his time in the NHL, and you really try to look at it and judge and really determine whether or not was this something that was there all along, or was this something that really he just turned it on when he came to Tampa. Not saying he wasn't doing his best in Chicago, but was it really something that maybe Julian Brisebois saw? And I know the conversation when he first came over, and he didn't exactly light the world on fire. He only had 7 points through 22 games. His plus minus wasn't exactly anything to be touted about. But when you look at him, and when that trade was brought, that trade that brought him here, a lot of people were saying with his time in Chicago, he had 21 goals there. Was that him, or was that him playing with Patrick Kane? And I think I was in that camp, honestly, that thought maybe it was just him playing with Patrick Kane. But then this past year, there was a lot of situations, and one can make the argument, well, when you play on a team with Braden Point, Kucherov, and Stamkos, and all these stars that the Lightning have, your numbers are going to be a little inflated. Well, I call BS on that, because when you look at the year as a whole, and the only way you can look at the year as a whole is from the beginning, who he played with. Cirelli wasn't with the team until really November. He didn't really get going till I think a little later on, probably a couple months down the road. And you look at the second line for the Tampa Bay Lightning, I mean, it was more so the Brandon Hagel show. I mean, Killorn was there as well. Killorn had a very, very quiet season in terms of, he put up the stats, but nobody really paid attention to it. And I think that, really at the end of the day, and it goes back to the contract signing, is I think that this was there all along. You put Hagel in a lot of situations, you put him on a lot of different lines, whether it be against a Coyotes or Canadians, or you put him up against a Oilers or a Vegas. I'm just throwing out teams here, or even in those in those big games against Boston or Toronto. For the most part, he's been successful. He's been effective. So I have reason to believe that this is going to go down, unless he completely falls off the table, or he's riddled with injuries. Knock on wood. I firmly believe this is going to be one of those deals that we will look back on in probably the next 5 years that will say, holy smokes, Julian Brisebois not only nailed this, but this is one of the biggest steals in NHL history. And I think the only way that doesn't happen, I mean, stats-wise, if he's not hitting that 35-40 mark around there, putting up close to 100 points, maybe you could look at it as like, yeah, this was a vanilla deal. But at the end of the day, I really think that this sets up the Lightning not only for the next 5 years or so, but it really puts them in a good place in terms of talent-wise, because now they don't have to worry about finding a guy to complement Point and Cooch as Stamkos continues to get older, as Cooch starts to get to that age where we might see some wear and tear rear its ugly head, where you could finally look at this Tampa Bay team, especially that first line, and say, all right, not only do we have the guys who could complement each other, but could also solidify this line for the next 5-8 years. And that's Point and Hagel. And then you throw those guys on the wings and you move up Cirelli. In my opinion, as long as these guys continue to grow and play the way we all know they're playing, in my opinion, this is one of the best first lines in the league. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. I firmly believe that this move will have implications, not only money-wise, but talent-wise for the next 5 to 8 years. I'm curious as to what all you think. Maybe I'm looking way too far into the future, instead of just worrying about this upcoming season. So let me know about that. And as always, comment on our YouTube page. And yeah, we'll continue to look at Brandon Hagel and what his signing means for the Tampa Bay Lightning, especially in this upcoming hockey season. So wrapping things up on the show, I just wanted to talk real quick about Darren Radish, the signing with him. I really thought that that was a good signing for the Tampa Bay Lightning, not only because obviously you're bringing him back, and now at the time he's not really projected to be in the starting lineup, which I just think it's because he's a little banged up, and you don't know what exactly his recovery time might be. But at the same time, um, signing him for and just to so anybody's not aware of what the numbers are that are with Radish right now. So he's in the last year of his contract as well, of a 2-year, $1.5 million contract. Uh, this this contract extension that he got this year, uh, will put him on the books till 2026, and he'll be making about a little over $1 million next year, and then about a little over 800K in 25, 26. And this is another guy I think that really, even though he's kind of towards the end of his 20s, about to be 30, when this contract does expire, I really think that his play in the playoffs last year, alongside what we saw him do in the regular season, which was really not much. It was only 17 games played, uh, 3 points plus minus of -4. Uh, it was really what we saw in that series against Toronto is what really grabbed me. And that's because the guy has had so much little experience at the NHL level. And then he comes in, especially in a pressure pack series where really the Lightning aren't playing well, really leading up to the playoffs. And then you go up against your division rival, a Toronto team who was really set on just trying to do anything they can to get to the second round. And he goes in there, despite the performances of what his teammates had at that time. I really think it shows you something. I really think it shows you just the maturity level that he has. I'm not saying that we're going to see some sort of Nick Pervix like season out of him. I think Darren Radish is more of the defensive side of a defenseman. We're not going to. I think, and I don't even think Nick Pervix. And we could have this conversation for another time. But I don't even think Nick Pervix is going to have the same season he had last year. He kind of, as we all know, cooled off as the season went on. But I think that Darren Radish, his ability, especially in really pressure cooker situations where he had the puck, there was a couple of plays, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I remember towards the end of the series, it was 5 and 6, where he really did a good job at the corners of really just separating the puck carriers from the puck itself, and really forcing turnovers, and really staying tight-lipped in front of the net. And I really thought that really shows a lot of maturity, and I really that's really comforting, especially with when you have these question marks surrounding the Lightning third line defensive pairing. Um, and I firmly believe that he will be on that third pairing as the season progresses. Like I said, he's a little bit banged up right now. I think that at the end of the day, I think that the Lightning will, regardless of maybe how other players are playing on that lower line, because let's face it, nobody wants to see Hayden Fleury playing on the third line for the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's just something that's going to be a nightmare for everybody involved. I firmly believe. No disrespect to Mr. Fleury, but at the same time, I mean, he was really a non-factor last season, and I think that the Lightning are moving past that, and definitely I think, signing Radish, extending him, I think at the end of the day shows that they want him to be not only on this team, but to be uh, on the team for the long term. So we will stick a pin in that and see how he does once he gets back from injury, and see what exactly the Lightning's plans are for him, because he has that ability. I think as the season progresses, barring Nick Pervix either having a phenomenal season once again, or maybe a Chernak injury, or Sergachev playing out of his mind, or Hedman kind of having pretty much an identical season from last year. I think that this team is set up great defensively. Depending on how it turns out defensively in terms of the pairings, I do know, I will assure you that Sergachev and Chernak will be together. Everything else, I think, is just a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis. Hedman obviously will get his time on the first line, of course. I mean, he's been there forever. He's been one of the best in the league, pretty much since day one for the most part. So he's going to get that benefit of doubt, and really he's going to have to play just putrid hockey for there to be some sort of change. As for his defensive partner, Nick Pervix, I still think his job isn't exactly set in stone on that first line. I think Radish does have the potential, from the little that we have seen out of him, to kind of leapfrog him into that first line role, as well as with that question mark on the third line with Calvin DeHaan. I have no problem with him. I thought that was a great signing, bringing him in. It's just the Zach Bogosian factor. As we all know, he didn't play that much last year at this, and he also has a lot of miles on him. So, you know, is he going to be able to play a full 82 games? Answer is most likely not. What does that mean for that last line pairing? We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, Radish will probably platoon that role with him to start off the season. But like I said, I firmly believe that Radish does have the potential to go all the way up to the first line if the situation calls for it, and if he plays up to that level as well. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like I said, do you like the Hagel signing? Do you like the Radish signing? And we'll probably see a lot more deals like this as um, players' contracts start to get to that point to where the Lightning have to make a decision. Do they keep them, or do they let them walk in a year? So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. But I also think that Julian Brees shouldn't get too trigger happy with these contracts, because then you could get stuck with a player, no matter how little you may pay them. You definitely want to hold on to every cent and spend it very wisely. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.